Okay, hello. So my name is Megan, and today I'm going to be talking about the insect food taboo that's very prominent in America and how I think this taboo could be possibly broken or at least challenged. So this is just a slide about what this presentation is going to be like. So here it is. First, I'm going to do a quick review of what a food taboo is, but I'm not going to go super in depth because I think Professor Lane did a pretty comprehensive video that you can check out in the Lecture 7 YouTube video. But I will be going over that. I'm also going to briefly talk about what countries are eating bugs and why, which means the nutritional, economical, and ecological benefits that come from eating insects. Again, this is just a review because we have already learned a lot about this. Um, Next, I'm going to talk about the insect taboo in a way that's a bit closer to home. Basically, I conducted a relatively simple social experiment where I asked a few University of Oregon students some questions about the insect food taboo. I'm excited to talk about that because I think the results were actually pretty interesting. I'm then going to talk about possible ways this insect taboo in the West could be challenged or even possibly broken. I have researched how food norms are established, and I'm going to focus on how this food taboo could change with social media and education that's specifically surrounding the environment. Then, finally, I'm going to wrap up this presentation with the conclusion. Okay, so what is a food taboo? Well, according to lecture, a food taboo is a religious, cultural, or legal prohibition against eating certain foods. These taboos vary from country to country because everyone has different traditions and cultures. But that said, I do want to stress that these aren't just preferences, these are deep rooted beliefs that don't usually change. For example, some people who are Jewish keep kosher, which means that they do not eat pork or keep it in their homes. This is an example of a religious food taboo. Then we have culture, which means people in that specific community share an ideology that a specific food should not be eaten under any circumstance. The easiest example would be with the example of dogs. People in the West are revolted by the idea of eating dogs because we all share the ideology that it is unacceptable. And yeah, if you're like me, the very idea of eating a dog makes you feel sick, which perfectly encapsulates what a food taboo is in its most basic form. Additionally, some vegans believe consuming animal products in general are unacceptable because of moral or ecological reasons, which is why I have the milk carton up there, which represents vegans who don't consume milk or who consume animal products in general. Another example would be legal prohibition of a food taboo, like eating an endangered species. People don't do that because it's illegal and also immoral. Overall, even if a certain food has nutritional value, people still opt to not eat it even on survival situations on occasion, because that's how deep some food taboos are. That said, I say in the slides that people will not eat if it has even if it has nutritional value, but I think that in some cultural settings that actually can be challenged, which is what I'm mostly going to be talking about for this presentation. Okay, next I want to discuss who's eating bugs and why. The short answer is that a lot of people eat bugs in their everyday diet. This is actually called entomophagy, which many countries, Asian countries specifically, are known to do. For example, in Thailand, many people eat high volumes of grasshoppers, crickets, and woodworms. The bugs are usually fried, seasoned, and served to the Thai people. Um, In fact, something interesting that I learned when researching this project was that many bugs are actually served as street food. This is because it can be made quickly and for relatively cheap. Um, and yeah, countries like Africa, or countries in Africa like Ghana, are known for eating insects as well. In fact, in the springtime, people of Ghana actually rely on termites as their main protein source. Um, and also, as you can see, on the presentation, there's a photo of a worm in a liquid. This photo is actually of a popular drink called mezcal, which is served in Mexico, and it's kind of like tequila, but yeah, that's a very popular way insects are digested in or eaten in Mexico. But yeah, there are so many other places that rely on insects. I don't have time to cover them all. That said, the question is why? Why do so many countries rely on eating insects? And this comes down to its nutritional value. Insects are actually extremely nutritious, especially with how small they are. As you can see on the chart, insects like crickets have more protein than salmon or even lean beef. With crickets having 31 grams, 90% of lean beef have 22.4 grams, and farmed salmon have 20.4 grams. And obviously, there's other um, nutrients like fat, omega-3, and fiber that um, is also variable in those things. But yeah, they also have all 9 of the necessary amino acids that you can only find in animal products, unless, of course, you take a B12 supplement. And the insects are also very digestible. We can absorb much of the nutrients easier. Also, in many other animal products, we don't eat organs, but with insects, we eat the whole thing because it's so small, and organs actually have a lot of healthy nutrients in it, like iron and other minerals like that. Also, eating insects is so much better for the environment. As we learned in class, raising, harvesting, and producing one cow is so expensive and awful for the environment, obviously. And so this is applicable to other major animals like pigs and seafood. But with insects, it's super easy and cheap to create with the use of really just crates because insects are capable of producing and reproducing by themselves, which means people don't need to spend money on crazy amounts of land and food for the insects. Because obviously, when we learned about the beef industry, the meat industry in general, they have to buy 2 lands, one for the food, and then obviously one for the cow in general, which leads to just so much environmental issues that would be solved with eating insects in a Western diet. And when researching, I also found that many vegans are actually open to adding insects into their diet because they don't consider it immoral like they do with eating animal products. That said, does it matter? Food taboos aren't easily broken, and eating insects in America is a huge taboo that is reinforced with different kinds of media. In fact, according to the Food and Agricultural Organization, 72% of Americans say they are absolutely unwilling to eat insects because it's disgusting and primitive behavior. Um, with this in mind, I started to wonder why this was a common ideology, and it turns out it started as a class issue that has continuously been reinforced with the use of media. But when I say class issue, I mean that it goes all the way back to the colonization of the New World when classes started to form, because cleanliness was considered a sign of wealth and bugs were considered the epitome of dirt. So if many times peasants would be, or poor people, would be around insects, and upper class people would consider them dirty or lower class because they were surrounded by bugs. So it's very much a unfair kind of social construct that formed during that time. Additionally, bugs in general are presented to be a menace in society. We are taught to be grossed out and even scared by some insects from childhood. These feelings are then capitalized and dramatized with media shows like Fear Factor that present eating bugs as the grossest and scariest thing someone could do. I personally grew up and I used to watch Fear Factor. It really did reiterate the idea that bugs are disgusting and that nobody would ever eat it willingly. And that perfectly represents the reoccurring food taboo that we have in America. Okay, so since these are big numbers and big concepts, I really wanted to test this food taboo a little closer to home. So I decided to go to the University of Oregon campus and ask 5 men and 5 women if they would be willing to incorporate insects into their diets. And that was all I asked at first. I gave no facts or figures and just said it was a question for anthropology. And every single one of them said no with little to no hesitation. So 10 out of 10 said no. I then added some background information, which I just talked about in the previous slides, about how eating insects is extremely nutritious, ecological, and economical. And I was actually surprised by how many answers changed, with 7 out of 10 saying yes, they would add insects into their diet. 4 of them said they would if it helped the environment, and 3 of them said yes if they couldn't see the bugs. The three that still responded no defended themselves by saying they have an intense fear of bugs that they don't think that they could get over. Overall, this made me start to believe that maybe this taboo could be challenged through education and a little bit of innovation. Okay, so like we covered before, food taboos are more than just preferences, and in this case, the choice to not eat bugs is very much a cultural food taboo. That said, I think this particular food taboo could be challenged. First, it's important to get rid of the quote unquote ick factor surrounding eating insects. I think for a lot of people, this is very present. When I see a bug, I'm automatically grossed out, and the last thing that I want to do is eat it. But there are ways to make it easier for people who already have this predisposed automatic reaction to insects. One way is to use insects in a way that aren't whole bugs. So, for example, cricket flour. Cricket flour still has all the healthy proteins, vitamins, and fats that whole bugs do, but it's significantly less gross to some people because you can cook it into things, you can make it into chips, you can make it into bread, and you can't see the crickets. It's basically just a dust. Um, Next, it's important to use big brands to sell insects. People are more willing to try a food if they trust a brand and aren't hesitant if it's safe or not. Because, for example, a few years ago, the Seattle Mariners began selling chupulines, which is fried grasshoppers, during the game. They were fried and covered with lime and salt, and they originated from Mexico, which is actually where the ballpark executives tried it for the first time and decided that they really liked it and thought it would sell well in the stadium. And they were right because it's been selling out game after game. Next, it's super important to educate people on why eating bugs is beneficial. It is one thing to offer them in a way that exotifies them, but that won't keep the momentum going. In this particular political time, people, especially young people, are extremely vocal about the environment and willing to make changes. That's why it's super important to educate these people about the benefits of eating insects, because once people hear the health and environmental improvements that can be made, people will be willing to try it, as we saw with my own little experiment on campus. Next, it's important to make it uncool to eat bugs only in disgusting situations. A perfect example of this would be with the show Fear Factor, like I mentioned earlier, because it perpetuates the stereotype that insects are dirty and gross, and people like me from youth begin to fear them. But with that, my last point is that it's very important to target the younger generation. People my age and older usually have a hard time letting go of the ick factor, but if we become educated and then teach our kids in healthy and sustainable ways that eating insects isn't primitive behavior, the new generation won't have to deal with the same issues we did surrounding this taboo. And in my opinion, this could be a way to end the taboo forever because we teach the kids to unlearn that this taboo is gross, so we learn a new way of going about it, which is proven in different societies. Next, I just want to do a conclusion slide. So I just want to end this by saying that food taboos are very real, and although some food taboos won't ever change, we can still question why they are there. And in fact, I think that's actually very important to do. Next, it's important to be educated. Because before this class, I didn't know that insects had any nutritional value, and to learn that if America switched to incorporating insects even a little bit into our everyday diet, we could help the environment in so many ways. Um, Lastly, I think it's okay to be hesitant about eating insects. I'd be lying if I said I'm in a place where I'd be willing to incorporate insects into my diet right now. I think that will take time and some smart branding from big corporations, but I think it can be done. Thank you so much for listening.